For the first time, delegations from the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine will sit down together in Abu Dhabi for the first trilateral talks since Russia's full-scale invasion nearly 4 years ago. The talks come as pressure mounts on Kyiv to secure a peace deal. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described the meeting as a step, hopefully, towards ending the war, with the focus on the status of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. Russia has demanded Ukraine surrender the 20% of the territory it still holds in the region, a demand that remains a key stumbling block. For more on all of this, we're joined on set by Rochelle Ferguson Bouyahi, our international affairs editor. So, Rochelle, it's always lovely to see you.
You too, Catherine.
The talks come after Zelensky and Davos seemed to suggest that the summit in Abu Dhabi had been sprung on him. What more do we know about that?
Well, that's right, Catherine. Zelensky kind of joking that, he's barely aware of this summit. He hopes the UAE is aware that, there'd be this summit taking place in Abu Dhabi. What we know is, as you suggested there, this is the first trilateral summit. So with Russian, Ukrainian and US negotiators meeting around the table for the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion into Ukraine. It's important to say that those around the table are not necessarily the career diplomats. This feels a little bit informal. It was put together, this meeting, quite swiftly. It comes off the back of talks at the Kremlin with Vladimir Putin on Thursday, obviously with the US envoy Steve Witkoff, Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. This could go, could suggest that as far as the US and Russia see things, it's quite positive going first. Russia came out and said, that these were exceptionally substantive, constructive, frank talks that took place when it comes to Ukraine. So perhaps in the US and Russia's eyes, things are going well. It doesn't seem to be the case for Volodymyr Zelensky. We had quite a fiery speech from Zelensky in Davos on Thursday when he, criticised Europeans and said that, there's a lack of political will when it comes to stopping Russia's invasion. It's important to suggest that this morning he struck a more conciliatory tone. He did come out and say, Europeans have made some steps in helping Ukraine go forward. These talks, as I say, quite impromptu, weren't necessarily expected on the Ukrainian side. They're underway. There are very few analysts looking at this who think that something concrete will come out of today. We've seen a lot of diplomatic activity between the US, Russia and Ukraine. We've yet to come to a deal. So it remains to be seen what may or may not happen in Abu Dhabi today.
And as we heard, Zelensky saying this is possibly a step towards peace. There's all this talk of positive talks on all sides, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a deal in sight to end Russia's aggression in Ukraine, does it?
No, that's right. The last couple of visits that Steve Witkoff has made to Russia, he's spoken about having an optimistic tone and feeling that we're really quite close to a deal. Once again, in terms of what's concrete has come out of that, it's not a great deal. The same sticking points are there. Zelensky has stressed that when it comes to compromise on territory, there will be still no movement from Ukraine. They do not want to give up 25% of the Donetsk region that they still control. That, of course, is a demand that Russia continues to make. Zelensky standing firm on that. That, Russia says, is ultimately a major obstacle to signing a long-term peace deal. They say, without that 25% of the Donetsk region, they will essentially continue what they're calling their military objectives in Ukraine. So this territorial situation was discussed, remember, last year in Alaska with the US and Russia. Russia saying that they want to stick to what was agreed with them and Trump at that time. But of course, Ukraine is saying that this isn't going to be a possibility. Just a reminder to our viewers, another sticking point. We've spoken a lot about territory, but the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is also key in this. Remember, it's controlled by Russia. It has been since March 2022. Russia says they have no plans to relinquish control of that. There was some talk that perhaps it might be handed over to the US, who would control it for a while as negotiations take place. Russia says they've heard no such thing. So there are these key territorial issues, plus the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, which are, of course, posing key issues here. That because, nuclear safety, and of course Ukraine's energy crisis, which is ongoing owing to Russian strikes.